Hello, and welcome to another Ragnar's unit of the week. And today we're taking a look at the Valentine Mark IX. The British Armoured Forces essentially had two major classifications for tanks that they used, especially in the earlier war. The first of these were cruiser tanks, which were lighter tanks meant to be used in cavalry-style operations to break through and envelop enemy positions. The second type of tank was the infantry-style tank, which was slow, steady, heavily armoured, and mainly used to support infantry. The Valentine was the latter example. The Valentine would enter into service in 1940 with a rather respectable 60mm of frontal armour and a 2-pounder gun. The early models of the Valentine had a pretty cramped turret with only a 2-man crew, but by the Mark III model, they managed to upgrade it to a 3-man turret. It's also interesting to note, a lot of the Valentine's design was very similar to the Crusader A10 model of tank, as you can see by the side by side. The whole Laura assembly is virtually identical, albeit with a few differences. This made production of the Valentine relatively cheap, as they already had the parts to make it, especially in comparison to the Matilda infantry tank. By 1942, however, the British realised that the 2-pounder gun was really not enough to deal with the German armour that they were encountering, and so they decided to upgun it to a 6-pounder gun, albeit with this upgunning, they did have to remove the coaxial machine gun. And of course, a lot of these tanks would be sent over to the Soviet Union, over 2,000 of them. The Soviets found them to be okay. With the early models of the Valentine, they did appreciate its rather low silhouette, as well as its relatively good armor protection for early war standards, but it performed pretty poorly in heavy snow, and of course later in the war, the initial 2-pounder gun Valentines which they sent didn't really perform that well, especially in the high explosive category. So they were rather happy to finally receive some Valentine Mark IX models with the 6-pounder gun. But by late 1943-44, a lot of these Valentine tanks would not really be seen frontline service and would be used in more of a reserve role. In-game, the Valentine Mark IX is a 50-point light tank available to the 3rd Guard Mech, the 3rd VDV, the 9th Guard Cav, and the 184th Infantry Divisions. And it has one weapon. That weapon being the 6-pounder gun with 38 armor penetration shells and 15 high explosive shells. The 6-pounder is your 6-pounder. It does a lot of pounding very quickly with its high rate of fire and pretty decent accuracy and penetration statistics. This one does also have high explosive shells, but as you can see, they're pretty poor. Pop down to the miscellaneous stats has 85mm of frontal armor, strong top armor, 55mm on the side, and 35mm on the back. It goes a whopping 18 km an hour off-road, 25 km an hour on the road, medium stealth, and low optics. In battle, the Valentine Mark IX is a rather odd little duck, because you see, it's not really a tank, it's more of a tank destroyer in disguise as a tank. As a tank destroyer, it's pretty damn good, Joe. That 6-pounder gun is a very effective anti-tank gun. Yes, it has a hard time against heavy armored Tigers and Panthers. It's really only good dealing with the majority of German medium armored units. But by God, with 12 rounds a minute and 55% accuracy and 115mm pen at closer range, that is pretty respectable, much better than Soviet 76mm guns, for example. And like a tank destroyer, it does have medium stealth, meaning that it is pretty good at ambushing enemy tanks. Of course, you do have worse optics, because it is technically a tank still, so you still need reconnaissance to actually spot the stuff that you plan to blow up. But it really should only ever be used in a very defensive role, especially considering its speed. It takes bloody forever to get to the front line. If you're buying this at the start of the game in A phase, expect it to take like 3 to 4 minutes to actually get into a reasonable position to start blasting array enemy tanks. But when it is in that static position, in medium forest cover, it's a very scary tank to go up against, because it will just constantly shoot anything that comes its way. And even if it's not getting penetrating hits, there's a good chance you're going to get a lot of good critical hits and knock out the tracks or optics or stun any of the crewmen. And I do want to iterate that using this tank in an offensive role is goddamn suicidal. You have no machine gun, and your high explosive shells are pretty trash. I mean, they only added them in later because it had no defenses against infantry, because you could just run up right to it and just throw an anti-tank grenade at its face. And of course, with the speed, it's not going to get anywhere fast. This is more of a second line defensive unit to blow up any enemy tanks that get through your initial major front line. And for divisions that it is available in, it's definitely a very worthwhile choice, because usually a tank tabs is pretty lightly armed with Shermans or T-34-76s or other sorts of light tanks, for example. So a few Valentines to help buff up the firepower is definitely helpful. And it also has a very generous availability curve of 8 in A phase, 16 in B phase, and 24 in C phase. Unvetted, of course. So it's very much a useful unit to take really in any phase. I definitely think it's most worthwhile in A phase, as you can actually spend the time to set it up on the front line, because you gotta realize it's going to take like 4 minutes or so to get into a position. Overall, the Valentine is a tank that really is just a self-propelled anti-tank gun, and not a very fast one yet. But when it's static and sitting down and blasting away at anything that comes within its range, by God, you're gonna be happy that you have it. And well, I'm gonna leave it off at that. It has been another Rang Rouge unit of the week. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as usual, please just take it easy.